Hi, my name is Elliot. I did my research topic on GMOs. Over 75% of processed foods today are genetically modified in some way. 90% of those, 90% of soy grown in the U.S. is genetically modified, as well as 80% of corn. So how many of you knew those stats or heard something along the lines of that? And that's exactly what the rest of the U.S. is like as well. Many people aren't familiar with that, and when something as basic as our food is in question, or someone's messing with something like that, it's pretty important to know what's going on. So there's two sides, obviously, to this: pro-GMO and anti-GMO. Those who are pro-GMO believe that it could be a solution to helping those in developing countries, especially rural and poor farmers. They believe it's perfectly safe. They're substantially equivalent to organic foods. They're more efficient. They have higher yields with less input. They're supposed to grow with less use of chemicals. And the reasons for anti-GMO is that there could be potential health issues. There's a lot of corporate control that comes with GMOs because the large biotech companies are the ones that have the means to research and create these new plants. Some believe that it's unethical, that things like nature shouldn't be messed with, they should just be left alone. And heirloom crops and organics taste better, and they are better for you. The research process was pretty difficult because of the two sides. It's such a new topic. I think the first GMO was made in 1992, and it's so new that there's really no conclusive evidence on either side. So that made it very difficult to really come to a conclusion myself about this, because I would read one article about someone who was for GMOs, and it seemed pretty wishy-washy because the author of the article was connected to a large biotech company, and so I couldn't fully trust that. And those in the anti-GMO were also somehow connected to biotech companies as well, because there's publicly funded research to look at GMO crops that aren't so those who can do the publicly funded research need a certain level of education or have the means to do it, and so really the only people who can do that are researchers that came from large biotech companies, and they come over to do like publicly funded research, like at a university, for different GMOs, and so that's hard to completely trust as well. So I did go through a lot of sources to come up with a pretty good idea of what I thought about GMOs. So for the environmental impacts, some types of GMOs encourage less chemical use. So there are ways to pick out genes that produce natural pesticides or herbicides within the plant itself, so farmers can use less chemicals, which would prevent runoff and things like that. However, on the other side of that, commodity crops such as corn and soybeans, which are very profitable and have high yields, are leading to runoff issues because there are the genes that prevent weeds from attacking the plants are actually evolving themselves, and so they're becoming super weeds, and so they're becoming resistant to the lower amount of chemical use, and so farmers are starting to use more chemicals, and so we're coming back around to the same problem again. So that's kind of the trade-off. And I read one article that talked about the potential to use GMOs in land that was once thought unusable, like arid land, or high soil content, or salt content in the soil, or plants that can survive without water for a long time. And that would really help in places like in developing countries, like Africa, for example, because a lot of the soil out there isn't the best for growing crops. One issue of GMOs is biodiversity. So with commodity crops comes with monocultures because farmers want to make a profit, so they grow crops that will make the most profit, and those happen to be corn and soybeans. And so all the farmers are growing the same crops in the same farm year after year, and so they're breaking down the soil, and there's just not a lot of biodiversity, and there's an imbalance in the ecosystem. So if something bad were to happen, like a disease coming through and wiping out corn, well, that's maybe half of the processed food in question. So it's important to keep in mind cycling through different types of crops. Kind of touched on this already, but GMOs could be used for high-yield crops in developing countries. So a lot of rural farmers maybe don't have access to land or roads to so the high yield could help them. The trade-off is that corporate control could cause problems, like the large biotech companies are causing problems here. They could cause the same problems over in Africa. So problem with corporate control is that GMOs are sold in packages, in that they sell a GMO that only works with a chemical that they make themselves. So it's the way to make profit, and it kind of traps you in. They're also influencing your government quite a bit. So there's been a controversy about labeling GMOs or not, and back in 1992, there was a lot of influence from large biotech companies, and so that's coming up again in that they don't want to label because, that'll hurt their profits, because if people were given the choice to choose between GMOs and non-GMOs, they're most likely to choose non-GMO, and so that would hurt their profit. So my personal opinion is that I think there's always promise in new technology. So if we give it time, I think we can work out the goods and the bad things about it, and it could really help us. More research should go into crops rather than commodity crops, such as rice. Rice has the same characteristics as corn in that it has high yield and it could create a lot of sustenance for us. Labeling is important because we have the right to choose. And there needs to be less corporate influence in Washington from these large biotech companies. I'm sure you've heard of all the Monsanto problems, and that's why. And when making these GMOs, biodiversity in the environment should be just as high as making a crop that will have a very high yield because of our ecosystem. I will turn it over to my response.
What was the most interesting fact that you learned while researching this?
I really didn't see the relationship between these large biotech companies and our government and how interconnected they are. I always thought GMOs were just by themselves, but really I think it's large biotech companies are really pushing these GMOs for profit.
Do you personally try to eat like organic food more often than GMOs?
I do. I try as much as I can. The downside to organics is that they're very expensive. And being a college student, that's kind of hard sometimes. But
do you think there's any ethical difference between GM products that are just plant or animal?
I didn't do too much research on the animal side of things, but I am leaning towards leaving animals alone. I think it's okay for playing with the genes a little bit in plants, as long as you're taking a gene, like a favorable gene from one variety of plant and just putting it in the same species. It's naturally occurring, so you're not really changing anything. It's like making a new breed.
Did your opinion change at all during your research?
It flopped back and forth because of inconclusive data on each side. It was very hard. I'm still kind of stuck in the middle where I think there's promise in GMOs, but the corporate side of things kind of worries me, and there's really no conclusive data on whether it's hurting us or helping us either. So I can't really say no to GMOs either. So I think in time it'll slowly start to change.
Do you think of any different types of tests that you could do to try to find if they're actually safe or not?
There was some. I read about some animal testing on rats, but the tests on those rats was done by patent holders of large biotech companies, and those rats were already prone to cancer. They're cancer research rats, and so they grew tumors from GMOs, but there's no way to know if that was from the GMOs or just because they were prone. So. Thanks, guys.